All right, folks, this is like the 7th time I've re-recorded this video because I just can't get it right. And I'm gonna be real with you, folks. I'm just having trouble getting going. I had my self-care day yesterday, and the self-care day itself went very well. It did involve a significant amount of alcohol, and that may be contributing to the cognitive slowness of this news broadcast. So you'll just have to bear with me as I try to make my brain work like a normal brain. Let's get at it. There is a distribution today at 12:45 in Dorchester Park. We do that every single Saturday. If you are ever able to make it, please come on out and help support. It's important to go there and show solidarity to the homeless community, hear about their needs directly, find ways to support them. It doesn't all have to be done through Cosmosu, but Cosmosu, we are trying to be a network of resources. One of our zines kind of compares it to we're like the soil for a forest that's growing. So we're trying to provide the basis for grassroots solidarity, for community improvement projects. And so please come out and get involved. You can also come out to our General Assembly tonight, which is planned for 7 p.m. Mountain Time. It's virtual. We will post a link to Facebook for people who'd like to join. We'll also post a link on the Discord for those of you who are in the Discord. We're going to be discussing progress on initiatives that we approved at the last Assembly, discussing long-term strategy, and discussing logistics for the food drive on March 9th. On March 9th at 10 a.m., we're calling into and standing outside of City Hall to support trans rights and inclusion after the transphobic comments made by Councilwoman Jill Gabler. Cosmosu will be there gathering donations of food and winter supplies, as well as selling zines. The Utah State Legislature voted to create a new Colorado River Authority, which is a $9.6 million water agency that would advocate for more access to Colorado River water and hasten the construction of the Lake Powell pipeline to draw more water from the river. The project and the new agency have drawn opposition from environmental groups and state Democrats. State Senator Kitchen of Salt Lake City summarized the opposition to the move in a statement reported by The Spectrum. Quote, "The bill has been railroaded through the Utah legislature despite widespread criticism about its climate change denial, lack of transparency, and the bill's exemption from conflict of interest laws. Local groups and tribes would not be fairly represented in the new water agency." Lost my goddamn place. Which appears to be by design. "It risks igniting deep conflict over the precious resource in the near future. We do not need an expensive agency. We need transferred transparency. We need more conservation," end quote. And that is against the backdrop of climate change in the West, which is going to be provoking more wildfires and more droughts, creating a higher demand for water, creating a need to transition to drought-resistant agriculture, sustainable land use, and better water conservation in general. So that will affect Colorado because we are one of the watersheds for the Colorado River. 401, a black revolutionary group out of Austin, is still occupying Rosewood Park. They were not cleared by the police, thankfully. They're still out there. They are protesting the murder of 21-year-old Jordan Walton, an unarmed black man who was in the midst of a mental health crisis when he was murdered by the police. They're calling for autonomy for the park and for the neighborhood, and eventually hoping to expand that autonomy to a larger part of East Austin. There is a link to support them in the description. I did visit them. I'll see maybe if I can stop by and have an interview or something with them if you guys are interested in that. House impeachment manager Eric Swalwell is formally suing Donald Trump at a federal court in Washington for his role in the January 6th riot, saying that the loss of life and injuries were a direct and foreseeable consequence of the former president's actions. He's the second member of the House to sue the president since January 6th. That's what Eric Swalwell's doing. So that's what he's doing. It might make Trump have to testify in front of a court, which, given his inability to keep facts and truth straight and to make coherent statements, may end up leading to other legal charges for him. So who knows? Who knows? One of Trump's State Department appointees, who had a top secret security clearance, was arrested for beating a police officer with a riot shield and then using the shield to try to breach the doors of the Capitol. A marginal figure known as a loner with a sparse and unremarkable background. His name is Federico Klein. Federico Klein. I was going to say Keith something, but I was like, no, there's a K, there's an F. Federico Klein have been appointed to the State Department's Office of Brazilian and Southern Cone Affairs as a special assistant amid the protests from State Department officials who pointed out that he had no foreign policy experience. The New York Times reports that after Secretary of State Rex Tillerson expanded an office that handles Freedom of Information Act requests, which is viewed by many in government as an unrewarding outpost, Mr. Klein's superiors transferred him there. So he'd been working there. He reportedly is now complaining of having difficulty sleeping in prison and of the presence of cockroaches. So let's all get out our tiny violins for Federico Klein. We're so sorry for you. We're so sorry that you're facing consequences for your actions. It must be very hard for you as a white man. The Green Party has expressed opposition to H.R. 1 on the basis that it restricts voter choice and limits which parties can receive federal funds. This I thought was important. A friend of mine, whose opinion I respect, shared this earlier, and so I'm uncertain about the support for the bill that I'd expressed earlier, since it does seem like it could make it more difficult for a socialist party to break out. Here is what the Green Party said. I will just quote them directly and try to minimize my commentary on their statement. So, quote, the H.R. 1 would abolish the general election campaign block grants that parties can access by winning at least 5% of the vote. In the previous presidential election, H.R. 1 would eliminate this provision that was created to give a fair shot to alternative parties that demonstrate significant public support. Would replace the general election block grants, where each qualified candidate receives a set lump sum of public funding for campaign expenses with matching funds through election day. They call this a huge step backwards for public campaign finance reform, using the above-mentioned criteria designed to squeeze out alternative parties and independent candidates. It would eliminate the limits on donations and expenditures candidates can receive and make. And the Green Party asks, what kind of campaign finance reform is that? I do think, yes, that seems like having no limits and no limits on expenditures or donations is very not campaign finance reformish. It would also inflate the amount of money that national party committees can give to candidates from $5,000 to $100 million, which is an astounding increase, according to the Green Party, of a lot. I'm not going to try to read that number. It's a pretty big fucking number. It's 1,999,900%. That would give party bosses virtually unlimited power to flood elections with big money, and so that's the end of the Green Party statement. I do agree that it seems like, based on that the campaign finance reforms that they are trying to put through in that bill need to be stricken out or otherwise greatly reformed, and there also needs to be something about ranked choice voting, which is something that the Green Party is calling for. That's Howie Hawkins put out a statement just calling people to email their senators and ask them to oppose the campaign finance reform part of that bill. In other news, and this is why I'm re-recording this so much, I just found out that the Senate passed the COVID relief bill, so you may soon get a $1,400 check. You may soon also, if you haven't already, get a $600 check, so it may add up to $2,000. So that's all you get. Good luck. It's going to the desk. The minimum wage thing failed. 8 Democrats voted against it. Very sad. Very sad. And with that, we'll turn away from domestic news and we'll move towards international news. International. We'll begin with Senegal, country in West Africa. You may not know where Senegal is. It is shaped vaguely like a C on the map. It surrounds the Gambia, which was a British colony that basically claimed I think 50 miles on each side of the Gambia River back 200 miles from the Atlantic coast. So Senegal is the sea, and it was at one point the like kind of jewel of the French West African Empire. It was one of the only places in the French West African Empire where African subjects could actually have full rights as African citizens, and it has been known for stability since since it gained independence. It's been known as being one of the sort of beacons of African democracy, and I think I say quotes just because there was also still, after independence, a lot of interference from France in not just Senegal but all of the West African countries, except for Guinea Conakry. So, but in Senegal right now, there is that reputation for being a largely peaceful and democratic nation is getting a little shaky, coming under a little bit of contestation as Ousmane Sonko, a Senegalese populist opposition leader who has been known for advocating for tax justice, exposing corruption in the form of like finding actually as like a tax inspector, like finding offshore bank accounts run by Senegalese politicians and tracking embezzlement, criticizing national elites, was arrested on Wednesday after a beauty salon employee accused him of rape. His supporters, many of them young people, he's very popular with Senegalese youth, have decried the charges as politically motivated and have taken to the streets in protests, which have in some cases turned violent. 4 people were killed in clashes with the police as of Saturday, and so that's the situation that we'll be keeping an eye on. There are also protests going on in Paraguay over the government's poor handling of the pandemic, which was met with rubber bullets and tear gas by the police. Coronavirus infections there have hit record levels, and the country's hospitals are nearing collapse. The president of Paraguay has actually asked for some of his cabinet members to step down, so there is definitely a situation of political crisis going on there that many in Brazil and Argentina and just that region at large are keeping a close eye on. The Chinese government has proposed changes to the electoral system in Hong Kong that would give Beijing the ability to intervene in the selection of candidates for the Hong Kong legislature. Xia Baolong, China's top official in charge of Hong Kong affairs, said in a speech last week, quote, "The administrative power in Hong Kong must be maintained in the hands of patriots," end quote, just to give you a sense of the kind of nationalistic rhetoric that is being said there. Another example of that, Eric Tsang, a senior Hong Kong official, says, quote, "Cannot say you are patriotic, but you do not love the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party or you do not respect it." So that is very troubling. I mean, we've known for a while that China is under Xi Jinping moving in a very nationalist direction, advocating for like imperial expansion, advocating for what amounts to like kind of neo-colonial ventures in foreign countries, undergoing a campaign of ethnic cleansing in Xinjiang. So very much, it seems to me that China is heading into a direction that could be easily compared to or called fascism. I think it's perfectly reasonable, in this effort to crack down on Hong Kong. Democracy has been condemned by the U.S. and other international actors. There's an arms race heating up. Another Chinese news in the South China Sea. The U.S. Indo-Pacific Command's assessment requests about $27 billion for what it calls the Pacific Deterrence Initiative through fiscal year 2027, including about $4.7 billion for fiscal year 2022. This would include stationing missile defenses in the South China Sea. A German warship is planning a freedom of navigation patrol in the region in the coming weeks. China, meanwhile, has boosted their defense budget by 6.8%, reaching $209 billion, which, granted, is not nearly as big as our budget, but it is troubling because it is showing signs of this kind of international arms race. China is dealing with, beyond the situation in the South China Sea, conflicts with the U.S. over the status of Taiwan, and conflicts with India over the border in the Himalayas. And now, speaking of the Himalayas, I also have more updates on Nepal, which I promised. I am not an expert on Nepal or Asian politics, and so I was really curious about how the ruling Communist Party in Nepal is operating, given that I'd heard they were committed to multi-party democracy, and I was just really curious to see, what happens with this with this Communist Party in Nepal. Apparently, they are a Stalinist party, according to the World Socialist website. And there's another Maoist party and then a separate Marxist-Leninist party, and these are all they've tried to unify in recent years. WS has a great overview of the recent conduct if you're interested in digging more into that. But currently there's major infighting in this Communist Party that kind of has tried to merge together all these different actors. It's a democratic centralist party, so there's this expectation that if a large enough majority votes on something, the rest of the party has to get in line, and so if there's not broad agreement, then it's really hard for a democratic centralist party to govern. KP Sharma Ali actually dissolved parliament in December. I had no idea about this when I was talking about Nepal last time. He dissolved parliament and because he couldn't form a government. This was sanctioned by the president of Nepal. And the Supreme Court just ruled that this was unconstitutional. They've ordered Ali to reconstitute parliament within the next 13 days. We will see what happens. This does remind me of what is currently going on in Haiti with President Moise, who has also dissolved the legislature, and he's also tried to weaken the judiciary to cling to power, and protesters in Haiti, as I've mentioned in previous newscasts, have been calling for his resignation. Farmers in India have blocked a 6-lane expressway heading into New Delhi on their 100th day of protest against Narendra Modi's agricultural laws, which open up the farm sector to large foreign companies. They have camped outside the city since December. They began a march to New Delhi in September. They are sustained by a large nationwide network of support reaching to the Punjab. Al Jazeera reports, quote, thousands of men and women are being sustained by huge community kitchens serving food day and night and other facilities, including makeshift medical camps. This points to the importance, when you have a large protest movement, of having this kind of logistical infrastructure, having the ability to have medical tents and, crisis de-escalators and food ready to go, not trying to put that together on the fly in the middle of a protest movement. So that's just important to look at too, and it's inspiring. And I express my solidarity with the farmers in India. Protesters in Myanmar are calling for the UN Security Council to act as the junta's crackdown continues. Police officers who are tired of the violence have fled into India, actually. So that means that even some of the police officers who are being used as instruments of the state are trying to escape, and Myanmar was actually trying to demand that India send back 8 police officers that fled into their country. The U.S. reportedly blocked an attempt by the junta to clear out $1 billion from their bank account, too. So that recently came to light. About 50 people have died this week, probably more by this point. I mean, by Wednesday, I know that it was nearing 50, and the military government is continuing to use live rounds of ammunition against protesters to try to get the crowds to disperse. The UN Security Council may act. I'm not sure what will happen with that, but as I have said, we will keep an eye on it. Iran has agreed to cooperate with the International Atomic Energy Agency for the next 3 months, but they plan to reverse this move if sanctions are not lifted within that time. This is sort of like part of this diplomatic tit for tat. They had asked the U.S. to release sanctions before. There was this kind of back and forth with the U.S. attacking Iranian-backed militias in Syria. Now Iran is optimistic because they see the U.S. and Americans pushing for an informal meeting between the U.S. and Iran, and they perceive that as an attempt by Biden to prove his diplomatic deftness. So they are making this gesture of, yes, we're going to work with the IAEA for a little bit, but you got to lift the sanctions, please. And what will happen there remains to be seen. We will monitor that situation as much as we can. It's hard without a staff office in Tehran. But yeah. The Pope and a top Iraqi Shiite cleric al-Sistani held a symbolic meeting at the home of the cleric in the holy city of Najaf to call for peaceful coexistence between people of different faiths. They spoke for about 40 minutes. They were in a city that's home to the Imam Ali Shrine, which is one of the most visited holy sites in Iraq for followers of Shia Islam. And he also visited which, for those of you who don't know, is like the capital of ancient Mesopotamia. It was a very major city. He spoke in front of the 6,000-year-old ziggurat. Also visited a church that had been damaged by ISIS, and he gave a sermon in Baghdad. So that's good for the Pope. Good for the Pope. Pope is trying to get people to get along. So, yeah, nice job, Pope. Nice job from me, lonely agnostic pagan who doesn't really subscribe to your religion, but nice of you to do that. Mexico's Chamber of Deputies will be debating the full legalization of marijuana next week. So next time you need to flee a natural disaster to get to Cancun, you can get high while you do it on the beach. It's supported by the majority of people there, and is also supported by former President Vicente Fox, who sits on the board of a major international cannabis company. The vision is that, take it out of the hands of the criminals, put it in the hands of, retailers and businessmen. So debating it next week, we'll see where it goes. They've already legalized medical marijuana there. They've legalized the importation of CBD, and there have been moves to decriminalize drugs in a major way throughout the rest of the country. So that's significant. It's not, as far as I'd like to see us all people going with the legalization of drugs, I believe that all drugs should be legal. The government has no business regulating what you put in your body or what you do to your consciousness. I'm very hungover, and I've had to re-record this video. Now this is the 8th or so draft. This is like the 8th, and it's because it cut off at the end because the other drafts took up so much space. So maybe the government could be like, look at me and be like, look at how terrible this grad student has been at making this news broadcast today. We clearly need to regulate his consciousness and prevent him from using alcohol. But we already tried that, and it didn't work. Tried to prohibit marijuana, didn't work. We have tried to crack down on the methamphetamine epidemic with lots of punitive measures, lots of surveillance of who buys Sudafed. Doesn't work. People get meth still. And actually it has driven more profits for the drug cartels because they now can import pure crystal meth that can easily compete with the stuff that folks are able to make at home, because now they use a method called the shake and bake method, which I learned about in a book that, if you'd like, I can find the citation for it. I read it 3 years ago, and so maybe it's dated, but I don't know. Same thing with the heroin epidemic, same thing with psychedelics. The government's attempts to legislate consciousness, to prohibit certain kinds of drugs, only end up making people use them in more dangerous ways and situations and cause more health problems. And really, like with gun control, what we need to focus on is the underlying issues. The underlying material conditions that drive drug abuse are what we should target with our drug policy. So kudos to Mexico for legalizing marijuana. I wish you'd legalize everything, but you get what you get sometimes. With that said, please enjoy the Soviet national anthem. Have a nice day, and please, if you have to call me or say anything to me, do not make it involve bright lights or loud noises, because I've had enough of that.